I'm sorry, I can. What if the president wakes up tomorrow and says, I don't want any black people in the military? Do we give deference to him on that? Well, no. No, wait a second. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous because you're discriminating against a group of people in a very similar way. No,
I knew you were going to say that, but it's
excuse me. Well, I'm glad you...
I'm going to leave this one alone.
That is extremely ridiculous.
Argument, Elena, that the Trump administration is making here is that that allowing transgender troops to serve hurts lethality and it hurts readiness. What do you say to that?
Well, there's no evidence of that. I think that, if that was the case, we've seen transgender people serving honorably for the last several years. And what has changed between now and then? They've just woken up to a new administration who has a different outlook on their ability to serve. So I think that, if you talk to people who are serving on active duty alongside transgender troops, they're not making these complaints. The leaders in the military are not making these complaints. These are political complaints about military service. So I think that all of the courts that have looked at this issue and looked at it, have said there's nothing in fact to back up what.
So if you guys don't know what's going on here, they're talking about Navy veterans, or not Navy veterans, my apologies. They're talking about transgenders serving in the United States military. This was a decision that was previously overturned by Donald Trump during his second term. Some people agree with it. Some people disagree with it. In this specific debate, I don't know who exactly agrees or disagrees yet. I haven't watched this yet, so this should be interesting for me. Let me know if you agree or if you disagree. I'm going to be really real with y'all. Throughout the entirety of the time I've been on YouTube, I've always had one mantra, and it's cost me money, it's cost me subscribers, and to this day, it'll probably be the reason my channel never reaches the heights, and it's the mantra of the truth, objectivity. There are channels out there who will flat out lie to you. There are people out there who will lead you astray, but one thing my father has always taught me is to stand on integrity. I took that through YouTube, I took that through getting a master's degree in engineering. I always took that mantra. I'm standing on integrity, and I'm standing on objectivity and the truth. And this is a big reason why I think you guys will really enjoy Ground News. If you don't know what Ground News is, it's basically a news site that has purely objective news, meaning that it tells you the literal bias of every single news story. And I'm not playing. It tells you the exact bias. And I don't do no sponsorships. I don't do them. But this is something that I genuinely believe you guys need to know about. I'm not playing. Let's look at an example. So let's look at this story that came out literally not that long ago. It's called Joe Biden blames Kamala Harris' laws on sexism and racism and rejects concerns about his age. So if you look at this site, this is what your page will look like. It will be a Ground News at the top. It will be a news story, and it will be all the coverage details. Make sure you check out the page at ground.news/LFR Jojo. It's going to show you what the center bias is, where former President Joe Biden gave his first major television interview since leaving office in January 2025 on ABC's The View, which is something that happened. That's just literally what happened. It also tells you a little more details about it, such as Biden addressed the Democrats' poor 2024 election, which is something we've already talked about so far in this process. We already knew that, Trump was probably going to win. Let's be honest. But one thing that's very important is that it shows you what the left is saying about this interview. The left is saying Joe Biden blamed sexism and racism for Kamala Harris's election loss, stating that misogyny played a role and that Biden acknowledged taking responsibility for Donald Trump's re-election, remarking, I was in charge and he won, so I take responsibility, basically making Biden look very, very good. Versus the right are saying former President Joe Biden expressed that he was not surprised Kamala Harris lost in the 2024 election, attributing her defeat to sexism and racism. He defended Harris's qualifications, saying she is qualified to be President of the United States of America. Biden acknowledged the negative impact of COVID-19 on public attitudes, admitting that we underestimate the phenomenal negative impact that COVID had. One thing that's very important that I love that Ground News does is it doesn't even give you an opinion. It just gives you the objective truth of what both sides are saying. The right mentioned COVID-19. The left didn't even mention that at all, but the right made sure to mention it. The right also kind of put the blame more on Biden versus where the left made it seem that Biden was taking responsibility. And Another thing Ground News shows, it shows every single article. It's 42 articles here about this thing. What other site will show you 42 articles about anything? It shows you Biden touts close relationship with Harris, but not surprised by her election loss. That's a left-leaning source. It shows you the factuality. It shows you all of that. And then it shows you the right. It said, Biden said on ABC's The View wasn't surprised Trump defeated his replacement Harris. It says Biden says Republicans took sexist route to beat Harris. And it shows you the factuality. It shows you everything. So one thing that's very important here is that Ground News doesn't actually remove bias. That's not what they're doing here. They're showing you the truth. A lot of sites don't show you the truth. They don't care if you know the truth. They couldn't care less if you knew it was accurate and you didn't know it was accurate. So if you want access to Ground News, you can scan the QR code on this video, or you can visit ground.news/LFR Jojo, where you can get 40% off the Vantage subscription, where you can get unlimited access to literally any news in the world. You can get unlimited access to it all. It's not just politics, it's sports, it's science, it's all that stuff. I don't do sponsorships, but y'all, this is different. Y'all need to know about Ground News. They're built different over there. Anyways, let's get back to it.
The government is claiming here, in fact, the judges challenged them to produce evidence, and they couldn't produce any evidence. So I think it's a really dark day for our country, where basically we're allowed to discriminate against a class of people.
If they can't produce evidence that this actually does, in fact, have an impact on readiness, I mean, how is this not then just discrimination?
Well, it's the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who, according to our Constitution, is the head of the military. I mean, regardless of anyone's opinion or anybody's, whatever side you're on, whether you're for it or against it, at some juncture, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military, and he has and should have broad latitude to determine how the armed forces should be operated. And so I think that's what he's doing here. I think that's ultimately what the court said today, was that the president is the commander-in-chief, and we gotta respect that under our Constitution.
But I mean, to her point, if there's not a downside, and it's been going on for years now, and I mean, I'm just presenting your argument to them.
Yeah.
What is the argument other than Trump, Hegseth, just doesn't want trans people in the military?
Well, I mean, I think that the president, we'll ultimately see. I think that's why the court is allowing the president to move forward with this until it works itself through the court system. Maybe the Supreme Court will be the final arbiter here to say, yeah or nay, you can do this. But ultimately, I think the court is showcasing deference to the executive, saying that, look, you're the president, you're over the military. You do, for the most part, get to sort of dictate the standards of our military. And I don't really see how you can push back against that. Again, we'll see what happens in the court.
I can.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I can. What if the president wakes up tomorrow and says, I don't want any black people in the military? Do we give deference to him on that? Well, no, wait a second. It's not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous because you're discriminating against a group of people in a very similar way. No,
I knew you were going to say that, but it's still
excuse me. Well, I'm glad you.
I'm gonna leave this one alone
hold on,
today.
I'm curious.
That is extremely ridiculous. That is extremely a ridiculous thing to say. And I'm not only saying this because I'm black. The reason why that statement is a ridiculous thing is because when it comes to race, that is not as aggressive as gender is when it comes to combat. Meaning that an Asian man, a white man, an Indian man, so on and so forth, are still both men, meaning they still have similar levels of testosterone for the most part. They can still do very similar things for the most part, versus a man and a woman. They're just fundamentally different. I'm not going to go into any details. We all know they're just fundamentally different when it comes to a lot of things. An example of the difference is that women are able to give birth. A man just can't. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because when it comes to transgenderism, that means that you're transitioning from one gender to the other in some way, shape, or fashion. Meaning you're kind of in the gray area, literally, between men and women. So I'm not going to say it causes issues. I've never studied this topic at all. I didn't study it, but it's just a completely different subject. So if he were to ban a race from the military, that would be full-fledged discrimination, versus if you were to say, okay, which Donald Trump literally said, if you're a transgender, you cannot be in the military. There is some debate there on if being transgender affects your ability for combat. I'm going to be honest. I haven't studied this. I haven't looked into it. But that's the difference. Also, regarding the initial point, the president does have the power to say transgender people cannot fight in the military because the president is the commander-in-chief and is literally over the military. And that's just how it is. That's how America was set up. So he does have the power to do that, whether you agree or disagree with it. Let's continue.
Why is it ridiculous? I mean, you just said the president should be the one who just decides.
Right.
So if he decides, he wakes up tomorrow and says, I think it's bad for morale, it's bad for cohesiveness, for there to be Black people in the military, Latino people in the military, just in her hypothetical scenario, what's the difference between that and what we're seeing here?
I mean, are you really going to go down this ridiculous road?
I'm sorry.
This is ridiculous. This is a ridiculous argument.
Well,
okay.
The president,
considering what they've already
the
said about
president and the
DEI,
secretary of
let me just
defense,
let him-
the president and secretary of defense have an argument here. They believe that readiness and unit cohesion and overall operations of the military are impacted by this. That is their opinion, and that is the opinion of the commander-in-chief, who the Constitution gives broad latitude to run the armed forces. So that's their opinion. You're allowed to have one. You're allowed to have one. You're also allowed to run for president and become commander-in-chief yourself. But until you do, he's the commander-in-chief.
I have to just say, I didn't hear an answer to the hypothetical, right? I just didn't hear it.
Though.
I didn't. I mean,
Okay, I'll give an answer to the hypothetical. Because Scott Jennings, I will say your answer wasn't a true answer. You basically said because the commander-in-chief said so. So I'll give one. He might give one eventually, but I'll give one right now. The reason that there's a difference is because, for one, what Abby Phillips is implying is directly against the civil rights law. So it will directly be against the actual legislative process in America that bans discrimination based off of race and gender. The reason why this is different than, let's talk about Donald Trump's perspective. The reason why this will be different than him saying, okay, if you're transgender, you can't come into the military, is because I would just assume that if you're transgender, you are fluctuating between genders. I don't know all the details about it. And also you would have accommodations that you need in the military, whereas someone, because you brought it up, where Black people, you don't really need accommodations. There are the same requirements for someone who's Black and someone who's white who entered the military. Versus, if we all know this, there were certain gender standards in active duty combat that were different between men and women. So when it comes to being Black, white, Indian, Asian, Hispanic, so on and so forth in the military, there's no accommodation. You're either, if you're a Black man, you go to the men. If you're a Black woman, you go to the women. You do that. So if you're transgender, there are accommodations there. There are special needs set out there that the military would have to accommodate for, versus if you were, I guess, a man or a woman. So fundamentally, it's different right there. So the whole point that I'm getting at is that being a certain race doesn't require any type of special accommodation, and fundamentally doesn't require any type of special process in the military, versus gender naturally does. And transgenderism, according to Trump, requires a process that he's not willing to accommodate for anymore.
Okay, the definition of discrimination, according to the American Psychological Association, discrimination is the unfair or prejudicial treatment of people or groups based on characteristics such as race, gender, age, or sexual orientation. What is the difference between, prohibiting certain groups like transgender people from serving versus, people based on their race or even their gender, frankly?
I personally think there's a difference, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Well, I will
Do
say.
you believe that race and are you saying that the quality of race and the quality of transgender are the same?
I'm just asking the question because I think you're making there's a distinction, but you're not explaining why.
No, I'm asking you guys brought up the hypothetical. Are you arguing that someone's race is the same as someone choosing to become
But
transgender?
your argument, you've made the argument twice that the commander-in-chief's opinion is all that matters. You've said that twice now.
Well,
So
under
if
the
they wake up-
Constitution, yes.
So if he wakes up tomorrow and says it's not okay to be gay or lesbian and serve, because that's his opinion, there's nothing to back that up. They meet the physical standards, they meet the intellectual standards, they have voluntarily decided to serve their country, to give their life for this country. So many of us don't have to. that it's the opinion without any basis in fact that's what matters more than the Constitution of equal rights and equal protection.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the other thing, or there's a few things that bother me about this, and mostly it was the language of the policy, right? When you're reading at some of these words, transgender people as inherently untruthful, undisciplined, dishonorable. That's like a very weighty thing to say about people who are courageously deciding to protect this country. The other problem, Scott, is that it's never enough. It's bathrooms today. It's sports today. It's sports tomorrow. It's the military today.
No, it's also sports today, by the way.
Yeah, it is sports today. And
80% of Americans agree, by the way.
Oh, that's fine. And 80%, guess what? The majority sometimes is wrong. That also happens, right? Because the majority used to believe that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was somebody who was a threat, that somebody who was not a good American. The majority of people used to be against civil rights. Were they right? No, they weren't. And so the whole point is when you target one group, and inevitably that line moves to everybody else. And I'm not saying he's coming for black people tomorrow, but considering that this is a military or this is a leadership that is already using DEI as code word for black people already when it comes to the military, suddenly when you don't protect the most vulnerable, you wind up making it worse for everybody else that's in the marginalized community. You don't think trans people are vulnerable in this country?
So is it your position that the commander-in-chief should recruit people who you're describing as vulnerable into the lethal fighting force?
He should recruit people who want to serve and protect this country. And it's really kind of ironic considering he dodged the draft that he suddenly has an opinion about
He has an opinion because he won the election.
The good news is, and Elena, you pointed this out, this is going through the court system. The other side has the opportunity to present evidence.
Except for tomorrow, there's going to be thousands of people who wake up and get processed out. The harm will be done.
And I certainly understand that. But again, there's still an opportunity for it to continue through the proper process.
Right, but they wake up tomorrow without a job, being removed from their commands. Operational readiness will be impacted. And so there's commands that are going to be left without leaders. There's going to be real life implications for theaters around the world where our military is protecting this country. And for what end?
Elena, I guess my point is, if a strong enough evidence is presented throughout the court process, all the way up to SCOTUS, and it's ultimately believed, okay, hey, the other side has enough evidence where we can't rule in favor of the executive, then the executive, I believe, would respect that decision. But we have to allow this thing to move forward and see what was
your experience in the military like? Did you serve after you had transitioned, or?
No, I served before my transition.
So you weren't in during your at all?
No. I came to know that I was transgender while I was serving with a top secret and above clearance. And I knew that I couldn't pass my polygraph test. And so I had to make a tough decision. Do I stay true to my character, my values, my integrity, or do I choose to leave this role and live a private life? And so I think that the challenge is that the injunction was to allow people to continue to serve while the courts played out. Right? So there would be no harm done to these folks, giving the courts an opportunity to work through these issues so people wouldn't lose their jobs. Now they're going to wake up tomorrow without jobs. They can't just come back in for serving 22 years, waiting for this court case to work its way through for 6, 9 months, 2 years.
So you hadn't, so was there a prohibition on you transitioning while you were in the military?
Back in that time, there was a ban against serving if you were the don't ask, don't tell policy.
This was in the mid-90s.
This was in the mid-90s.
So I'm just going to give some insight on why this is different because how do I say this? I disagree with them using race and transgenderism as talking points. They're saying, well, what if he said black people can't serve? I think they know that's different, but I'm going to explain it because I don't think Scott Jennings, and I don't know the other guy's name, truly went into detail on why that's different. So if you guys don't know, in the military today, there are certain standards that men have to uphold, and there are certain standards, physical standards, that women have to uphold. They have different standards. So let's say you are transgender and you're transitioning to a woman. You would identify as the gender that you are transitioning to, and you would be held to the standards that women are held to. There have been a lot of arguments that is unfair for the women in the military. And the reason why this is a problem is because if you're in the military and you're going on missions, there has to be unit cohesion in the military or in the mission, meaning everyone on the mission has to have similar levels of fitness. Everyone in the mission has to have the same headspace or similar headspace, and everyone in the mission has to be on the same level. So if you are transitioning to a woman and you are on the squad with the women in a mission, then there will naturally, or there arguably will be different levels of fitness cohesion on that mission. The reason why that's different from race is because despite your race, you can have the same levels of fitness cohesion or unit cohesion on a mission. If you're black, it doesn't matter, is what I'm saying. Versus if you are transgender or transitioning, it literally matters. You're literally transitioning from one gender to the other gender. And whether or not you support it or you don't support it, it literally will lead to some level of non-cohesiveness in a unit. It just is what it is. And some people are like, okay, that's fine. There have been accommodations for it in the past, but Trump, in his case, said, no, I'm not making accommodations for it. I'm outlawing it, so on and so forth. That's the fundamental difference. It's the physicality of it. That's the difference. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about it because at the end of the day, whether Trump can do it or he can't do it, he can do it. But I'm not going to go into details about agreeing or disagreeing with it. But I will disagree that trying to say race and transitioning between genders as the same thing is just not true. It's literally not true. But nonetheless, I'm going to end this video here. My name is LFR Jojo, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.